if you can record this and pass it on, this is my own personal thought. Now I'm sort of like a lone survivor, me and my brother, of, a virtual Holocaust, I guess I could call it, whereby we were snowed in, hoodwinked, tricked into now, and then that became another awkward position here where I have to educate everybody on how the federal government was bombarded with Indian Act bans of having unruly members who disrupt meetings and get into big fights at meetings. So they finally caved in and said, okay, we will govern, but you can govern by order in council. Now that was fine. It went on like that. And then the federal government discovered, hey, we can persuade them to sign for what we want from the First Nations by patronizing and rewarding the political elite on a reserve. So they wound up getting what they wanted, and then the provincial government got a hold of that too, and they refined it even more. And along with logging companies like Teal Jones, who patronized our political elite here and tried to entice me into going to hockey games and stuff like that. So that all three governments got the hang of that, and they patronized, and then they got, my conjecture is that the Site C dam was systematically worked at by the federal government and the provincial government working to get different councils until they get what they want, the permission to put the dam in. And then the same thing happened in the pipelines. And I talked to 3 or 4 First Nations people along the line towards Kitimat, and 3 of them I talked to said, oh yeah, that happened here. They simply waited for an agreeable band council and had them pass the permission to have the pipelines go through. So they worked at, and it was so enraging to me to realize that the federal government used the Indian Act and their power to oversee band councils' actions, I guess you could call it, like we call it BCRs, band council resolutions. That's the same as an act of parliament. Or so that's why I feel I have to pass that on, to have it tested and studied to see if my truth is, or my conjecture is valid, because everything's so easy here for government to work with pliable councils, in particular when news media outfit, a smaller one, said that, hey, the Pacheedaht Band Council has been sort of advised and communicated with to deal with the problem they think is a problem they have here of getting us away from the forest. And that government patronization of the political elite is a lethal tool that I think they are now starting to refine and have business get all they want from the country via using the Indian Act and the federal government of power to let band councils govern by order in council. So that's one ploy. And I'm working at others right now. So I have to pass my idea on to academics and professionals, and just to see if that works, because that's virtually how it happened here in Port Renfrew. And as a witness to that, I can say that I can swear by oath that our band council, our political nepotistic, or whatever you call it, elite, are owned and operated by Teal Jones and the BC government, of which our Premier Horgan is a personal friend and comes to Renfrew and fishes with our chief. And so it's crying the blues, well, it's hard to not cry the blues when, in fact, I'm living in between the two chiefs in here, and they're both, and I'm quite ostracized, have been for 40 or more years. And I hate to be lectureful, but I feel that I have to pass this word on to people who can study it and see if they can find papers and proof of this system of patronage that will require a lot of labor, particularly along the from say Fort McMurray to Kitimat, with all the bands there, which means it'll be a major paper for some researcher. So that's why I feel that we must realize that the scope of the government efforts to, I think, suppress our actions is part of their oppressive tools that I feel that has been capitalized on for the last 40 years. And our hereditary chief, which is the chieftainship, which is another debacle, I guess you could call it, how the pretender chief is saying he owns the whole territory, and in fact, it's the young chief. His name is Victor Peter, the San Juan Valley. He's the lord of the San Juan Valley, pretty well, as you could say in England. And the Frankie is the pretender chief. And my family isn't really from Port Renfrew, sort of. We've been here for 100 years or so, but our original roots were in Clahoose and Clallam Bay and La Push. And that's another awkward thing to explain is the residency of First Nations people. All of us, pretty well most coastal Indians, lived in 2 or 3, maybe even up to 5 different villages, all up and down the coast. There's one who commuted from the Alberni Canal to Sechelt or next. So we were that mobile. And my immediate family had 5 villages that we commuted to. So we were pretty well what nowadays we might call an upper middle class family, where we had estates all over our territory. And that mobility was disregarded by the Indian Act and said, hey, you Joneses are from here, or hey, you 17 villages are from this little area here. Nitnat, there was 17 villages there, and then the Indian Act crammed them into one little one, smaller than all their other reserves, and which our chief here was the actual chief of the Nitnat Lake, and so he was sort of like the grand chief or the head chief. And our structure wasn't really as historians seem to have concluded, and our leadership was virtually a family thing, whereby each family had a head person. My mother said we didn't quite call us chiefs, but we just called them our leader or our head. And he was usually the eldest senior of the immediate family, which was my grandfather's brother, Willie Jones. Yeah, I think my biggest conjecture is that the fight over the Fairy Lake and the last old growth here is sort of a symbolic thing, both to the Grim Reapers, like the logging companies who work on the model of what is now being called colonial colonial economics or colonial
ecocide.
Yeah, and I feel that they're trying to fiercely defend the Grim Reap extraction economics, and that they're going to it to the end because the symbolism of our trees are a reflection of our original innocence, that my grandfather implored us to go up to the forest to experience our own original selves and regain our sensitivity. That's what I like to call it, whereby a lot of people are transformed by their experience up there. Like my nephew, just in the last couple of days, he's a different young man now. You know, he was a wild kid who did the streets drugs, and a lot of his friends died, but now he's scared of that, and he's up here and he's discovering that there is a tree of life, as religious books can say, and it's in fact our forest, you know. So I'm pleased with that, and there's lots of philosophics that I would like to, but I mostly right now have to rely on, um, I guess I could call it scholars and lawyers of our system, that I want to implore on them um, to realize that the scope of the government um, system of dealing with particularly local issues is by far more. It's spread all the way across Canada, and me and my friend were in um, Cape Breton and Sydney, and something Tau, Method Tau, or some darn thing like that, right adjacent to the town there. And we were visiting there. There was an elders lunch, and we were both invited. Member two, yeah. And we were in, and so I started talking with these elders there, and a spiffy new off-road vehicle went by us. And she said, the woman sitting there, or close to me, said, "Oh, he's got another car, another vehicle, looks brand new." And I says, "No kidding." I says, "Who's?" She said, I asked her, says, "Well, who's that?" She says, "One of our band council." I says, "No kidding." And she said, "Yeah, well, the inside family," she calls it, rule the reserve and go along with the government for everything they want, and they all get rewarded. And I thought, Port Renfrew, my hometown. So it goes all the way, the same system is used all the way across Canada to corrupt and our politics, and then use that without any regard to our social uplifting, and we leave that to the area of let's pretend, and it's kind of awkward to explain how much of a folly it is on my reserve of helping the local people, because in fact what it amounts to is that the political elite in the nepotic stance, they drive off all the very good people who could stay here, and they've driven off 4 this year alone, who were very capable. In particular, one of our counselors finally threw up her arms and said, "I'm going back to Vancouver." And it's like living in a fishbowl, she said, online. So I think my description, I want to pass on to academics and lawyers to help them realize the scope and the breadth and depth of this corruption system that the Indian Act has been maintaining, and now the governments are scared, panically trying to suppress the knowledge of this system that they use. And I think it's going to be even developed more to have let's pretend we give all the land back to the First Nations, and they may use that ploy to as because they have the control of the political elite, and they will take away the crown land and that from the federal government, which nobody seems to know who owns. And in fact, they say, oh, it belongs to the First Nations, let's give it back to them, but they own them. It's a grim situation, and I think our chief is now in the panic mode, desperately trying to override our efforts to save the forest by these two. I think they're sort of desperate axe waving. Um, the first one was him and Frankie, the pretender chief, Jeff Jones and Frankie Jones, said, go away, everybody. We want white man to go away. They virtually might as well have said that. And we will manage our forest ourselves. That was the first one. And then the second one, I think like this news media outfit said that, I think they were coerced or advised into how to word this latest stay away order to the CRD, where the CRD, I guess, they heard that the CRD may pass a resolution to ask to have the old growth saved, and they Pacheedaht Band Council said they're going to head them off at the pass before they pass it to keep the wool pulled over everybody, and their wool pulling over everything is sort of being tattered, because there are other things like the old growth logging and the logging of the watershed in the waterboard watershed of the South Island here, and oh boy, the filling up of the Gordon River, blah 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 blah. Gee, it goes on and on. And that's the scope of our battle right now. The government and the Band Council and Teal Jones will go, they're going to use everything they can to stop us. But I think now with the goof ups of the administration of the injunction, I think is helpful to us.
Yes.
So now to pursue them things, I think is of their cracks in their approach to the enforcement, I think will be really helpful. Now I think they stepped back trying to figure out what else they can do. I'll go up there and see. That's about the only place I feel of any real use, other than the fact that I can explain to all that I'm the leftovers of an oppressive system that is very successful and done most skillfully with the Indian Act. And the Indian Act is still being used these days to pull the wool over white people's eyes,
Yes.
by saying that all the bands are in favor of it and that we are fair. And in fact, it's sort of a big lie. I need to pass my understandings of how this history really is, because the history writers will edit it the way they want it, but they won't let the whole truth be understood. Much like even the stories about our former governance has been suppressed. I've never put on tape or paper my thoughts on how this corrupt system has been developed and used all across Canada, and even in the missing and murdered women. It was alluded to in about the 500 or 600 page there. There was umpteen scholars putting it in there, and they said that this system has been oppressing our people since the Indian Act was put in place, along with the boarding schools and the banning of the on the coast here, the banning of the potlatch, which I think my grandfather said it wasn't he said the biggest onslaught or attack our people ever had wasn't the putting us into residential schools or the Indian Act. He says the biggest thing that hurt me most and all of us along the coast was the last big death, whereby only the people between 3 years old and about 14 lived through the plague, and everyone else. So that is crucial because everybody, the 14-year-olds were in their sort of like you call sort of graduate school training, where you're going to be intensely trained from your 14 to 18 to earn your rites of passage into adulthood by you proving, you can make clothing for your children, or you can preserve food, or you can make a canoe, or you can, and that way you learned everything in them few years, and that was crucial. And we had nobody to teach us. I can cite one personal experience about my people here. We had about, in my boyhood, when I can barely remember, I was about 3 years old, there was about 20 or 30 canoes along the shore. And then when I come back, I asked Grandpa, I says, "Oh, what happened to the canoes?" And he said, "Well," she says, "the white man fisher boat took about half of them the way, and then half of them split by drying out and re-soaking, re-wetting, so it split the boats in half." And then, of all things, just about 2 months ago, I learned that our skill of gluing was using pitch from some tree and mixing it with ashes um, or what the heck was it else? A fine sand or something like that. And they melted down and poured it in the cracks, and that glued like a super strong glue. And so that's how we kept our canoes going. But we didn't learn it. It died in the Holocaust because we didn't get the training of our from our seniors. We did make canoes, but they all split too. And then fiberglass came along, and we learned to fiberglass it. But then the art was forgotten from about 1960. So there's an example of why and how our rites of passage was systematically destroyed. I think we're over the hill now, though. There are a few of us seeing the lights. In particular, you might have come across a few firebrand young women, especially, who are, oh boy. So, but still, they're crucial. We have to keep them on board and let them train themselves, I think, and not, just be together. Maybe I can help by recording the truths as I understand them, and educating people on my suspicions that the Indian Act has been skillfully used to pervert our own democratic system, whereby the businesses do get their stuff, and we wind up sort of almost scratching our head saying, "How did that happen?" I talked to one chief in Lake Cowichan, the Cowichan chief, and I don't want to be vulgar or anything like that. He says, "Bill, we're not going into treaty. We're just stringing along with treaty and sucking all we can out of it. And we're learning to manipulate the Indian Act to get all we want out of the government. And he said, Bill, we got them by the balls. That's what he said to me. And I realize now that it could be skill if we get people to understand it well enough, we can turn the tables within the Indian Act, much like the Kelowna First Nations did, and the Osoyoos and my nieces, Gitscan or whatever it's called. They're all getting the hang of dealing with government, and that creates another problem. Because if somebody ever goes over that huge paper, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, there's about 10,800 pages or something in it. And one person there said that if we get the hang of manipulating the Indian Act, like a few of the bands have learned how to do, taught themselves, the 60% of the budget will go to First Nations in about 30 years. So that's a huge problem federally. And I think likely the politicians will eventually panic and say, hey, let's fix this because they're getting too smart, you know. And so I think that will be a great thing. So my tentative plan is to say, hey, let's get the hang of what another person called suck out, how we can gain a system of sucking all the money we can out of the government, make it hugely expensive for them to operate First Nations bands, and then they will panic and say, hey, we better negotiate. So that's part is an education part that will be kind of difficult for me, more difficult than the manipulative nature of the order and council trick, teaching people that you can manipulate the Indian Act. So yes, I think it will wind up going to its own death if, in fact, First Nations politicians learn how to play the game of what I call suck out, you know, whereby you make it as more expensive than and imponderable than imponderous, you know, preponderous, or whatever you want to call that word, weighty, unwieldy for the government, that they'll say, hey, they'll throw up their hands and say, we better negotiate. You know, that's my romantic idealistic plan, I guess I could call it. So that will likely be the best tool to first educate. It'll take about 10 or 20 years for most bands to get the hang of it. And I think it's spreading. Like the Pacheedaht are now starting to realize that they have a tool which is sort of wicked and dirty. They have huge amount of welfare recipients with huge amount of mental health, and they're starting to get more and more money into education and child care and whatnot. And the government there, the people around town are saying, hey, the Indians are getting everything, you know, and we're getting nothing. And so that creates another problem of, you know, racism. So it's going to be touchy. It's going to be tender. It's going to be like most of you women did when you're dealing with your transforming adolescent, you know, your boy or girl who's passing through their last bits of childhood. But some of us stay there forever, though, so that's okay.